Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot, and welcome to another mod with me. Today we are going to be removing the gilding from my Star Tarot 2nd edition. So you can see here it has this shiny gold gilding. Mine actually came all nicked up and everything. As you can see here, there's like holes in it, and the corners all had the gilding where it actually wrapped around the front of the card and created a lip. I'm not fond of this shiny gold gilding anyway, so I thought, you know what, I'm just going to take it off and re-edge the deck in yellow or blue or maybe some fun combination. I love the Star Tarot. It's one of my favorite decks. This is the 2nd edition. I do also have the 1st edition, which I did also trim, and I believe there's a video of that on my channel as well. And this is the 2nd edition, which is the matte cards. They are much bigger. They are borderless with just the titles on the bottom. And I just adore this artwork. And I do actually quite like the cardstock. I'm just not a fan of this gold gilding. It is rough on my hands. And also the cards are, while I like that the artwork is bigger, the cards are still on the large side. And I have a really hard time getting my hands around it and shuffling it. As you can see here, it's a really big stretch for me. And when it's that hard to shuffle a deck, it makes me kind of not want to use it. You can overhand this deck just fine. That's not my primary shuffling method. And as I've mentioned before in many videos, when I can't shuffle a deck, that kind of interrupts my whole process or my whole sort of ritual of how I do my readings. So I thought for this particular deck, I want to take the gilding off because it doesn't work for me. And I thought that because I have my 1st edition that is already completely borderless just down to the artwork, I'm just going to take the gilding off of this deck. So I do want to maintain the titles because my other one doesn't have titles. So just to make this one a little bit different, although it's bigger, totally different cardstock. But just to kind of make it a little bit different, I am going to keep the titles. So what I'm going to do is just take the tiniest sliver off of each card just to cut the gilding off. And I want to maintain as much of the back as possible because I like the back. And hopefully just taking that little bit off the off all of the sides will help me make it a little bit smaller. With this particular deck, I think I can probably come in a little bit even further on the bottoms, which will also help make it a little bit smaller. So the thing I have to be careful about is not actually cutting into those titles. But at any rate, that's kind of my plan for this deck. I do love the big images. Again, I'm not a fan of the gilding. It really does bother me, and the deck is almost too large for me to work with. So that's my plan for today. So before we begin real quick, let's talk tools. I, of course, have my deck that I'm going to be trimming. I have my Fiskars trimmer. This is actually a new one for me because I replaced my, I shouldn't say replaced, I retired to just paper crafting. My other trimmer, I'd had it for almost 2 years, and after trimming a plastic deck with it, I thought maybe it's just a good idea to go ahead and replace that. I think getting 2 years out of a trimmer with as many decks as I trim is probably really good. I did hang on to my other trimmer just in case I ever want to trim another plastic deck, or I can use it for other projects. I also have my little triangle ruler here that I use to create a guide to just kind of make the process go faster, make sure that I'm getting those same measurements, my washi tape to hold it down, and my corner rounder. So I'm going to repeat the process that I do for all of my deck trimming now. If you want, there are timestamps in the description box below, so you can just skip through the process. I do check in every once in a while just so we can see how it's going, but for the most part, this should be a pretty straightforward trim. As I mentioned, I'm just going to take a sliver of it off. I'm just going to take enough off to get that gold gilding off. Now, I know a lot of people file their gold gilding off. Now, for me, because, and I have tried that on some test decks, but for me, I've got my process for trimming down that it's actually a lot quicker for me to just clip those gilded edges off, and it goes a lot faster for me. It also, the filing tends to bother my asthma and my allergies quite a bit, so that's another reason why I don't file the gilding off. But I have seen some people get some really cool effects as just taking a nail file or a very light sanding block to these edges, and they're able to get the gold gilding off. But as I said, that's not a process that I do because it irritates my asthma and my allergies, and I'm so much faster at this now at this point. So anyway, enough about that. Let's go ahead and get started on this particular project. So as per usual, I'm going to trim this whole deck using the measurements one side at a time. I did just kind of quickly go through the titles just to make sure that there wasn't anything. They're all down at the bottom, which is nice, but I'm also looking to make sure there wasn't anything like that was a really, really long word that I might run into an issue with, or text that was out of place. But for the most part, it seems to be pretty well in place. So to start with, enough rambling, let's get on with it. I'm going to, like I said, just be taking the gilding off. So I'm going to trim this down as minimal as possible. Because this is a new trimmer, I want to just throw like a test card in here. So I have just some like cheapy playing cards that I keep on hand for practice purposes. But I do want to make sure that this particular trimmer is going to cut the same as my other one did. I'm also checking to make sure that everything is lined up properly. That looks pretty straight. That gave a really nice straight cut. And I'm just, anytime you get a new tool, it's always a good idea to test it before you really use it on one of your decks. So I just wanted to give that a quick test first, just to make sure that everything is as it should be, and it is. So the first thing that I'm going to do is put a card in here. I'm going to trim off the sides and top first. I'm going to leave the bottom till last because I'm hoping to be able to get a little bit more off the bottom just to make this deck a little smaller, because it is quite large for me. I mean, if you can see here, this deck is over 5 inches tall. So it looks like probably 5 1/4 inches tall. And it is a little over 3 inches wide. So that's, 3.5 or 3 1/4. Yeah, no. So 5 1/4 by 3 inches is a decent sized deck. So the first thing I want to do is get my measurements in here, get my guide in here so I can see where I'm going to cut. Now, like I said, I'm going to take as little off of this as possible, but I do need to make sure that I get that gilding off. So, I mean, right there at 3, I might be able to scoot it over just a little bit more. I really don't want to take much off the sides. I'm not sure that that's going to be enough. Okay, that's a sliver. I should have got my washi out first. But I do want to get all the points down that I can. So I've got that in there. It is lined up straight, always a good thing. So I'm going to double check this. And I mean, it's just a sliver. Now before I cut, because I am doing just a sliver, I'm going to check a couple cards just to see. Feel free to jump ahead if this is something you've seen me do 900 times. Alright, so that's in there. I like that better. And there you go. That's the sliver I'm taking off. So it's not going to drastically change the size of the card, but it is going to remove the gilding, which was the main point. So I'm going to go ahead and trim the gilding off. So I got the deck all trimmed down, and it's not a ton smaller, but it's a little bit better. I do like it completely trimmed down without the gold gilding on the side. It already feels much better in my hand, which is nice. But now I want to go ahead and edge it. So I didn't have a blue color that I really liked very well. So I thought I would order a blue stamp. I didn't have a blue marker that really worked when I did all my marker tests. I just didn't find one that had kind of the right color tone that I was looking for this particular deck. So I bought a color box. Now I've never used a color box pigment. It is archival, so hopefully that will work just fine. What I am hoping to do, and it's a very wet ink, so I don't know how well it's going to bleed or how much it's going to bleed, but I think the color match is pretty nice. My plan is to use that in combination with my Brilliant stamp here, the Galaxy Gold, and I'd like to do a gold shimmer in the center just for something a little bit different, because we do have gold accents throughout the deck. We have the gold accents here on the little embellishment on the bottom of the card, and then there are little gold accents on the back. Now, I think that silver might have actually been a better choice for this, especially given the name of it, Star Tarot. But in order to match what is going on in the cards, I decided to go ahead and use the gold. Now, the other thing about using the gold is if I decide I don't like it, I can just go over it with the blue and cover it up. So the first thing that I'm going to do, and this is quite a lengthy process, so we'll just skip around as we need to, but the first thing that I'm going to do is to take each of these cards one by one and just run a little strip of gold on either side, and then I'm going to use the color box the blue to kind of fade into it. And that's kind of my plan. Hopefully that will work just fine. I did get a larger one just because this is a color that I use quite often. So because I don't want to run this the cards through this stamp pad, which will make it really grooved, because I do use it for other things, I'm going to use a paper towel, and I'm just going to dab it on here and then very lightly rub it and take the excess off, because there's going to be bleed over because it is a wet stamp. So that just gives me the little spot of gold in the middle that I can work around with the blue. So I'm going to do this whole step and then I'll add the blue back in. Okay, so I have the gold all done on the right and left side of the deck. You can see here, I didn't do it like, you know, wonderfully. I just got it on there because I am going to cover a lot of it up with the blue anyway. And I totally missed that card. Just that one side. Anyway, I did end up just running it along my stamp pad, even though I really didn't want to, but it just wasn't going on very well using the paper towel to just dab it on. Now I am going to do that with the blue because I don't want the blue to cover up all of the gold. I want it to kind of fade into the gold. So I'm going to do that first and on both sides, and then I'll actually just fully cover in or fully color in the tops and bottoms with the blue. So that's kind of my plan. Hopefully that will work out the way that I hope it will. So let's go ahead and get started with that. Now I have let these sit and dry because the ink stamps tend to be a bit wetter and they tend to take a little bit longer to dry, and I wanted to make sure that the gold was good and dry before I started trying to add the blue to it, mostly just because I don't want it to like smear all together. And get that gold. So what I'm kind of doing is I put it a little bit heavy on the sides, a little heavier than I really wanted actually. And then I am using the back of the paper towel to kind of just run it together. So hopefully I should just get a shimmer of the blue in the middle. That's the plan anyway. We'll see how well it works out. Okay, so sometimes my brilliant ideas don't actually work out. And that has been the case with what my original intention was for this deck, which was to leave the gold in the center and to do the blue around it. There's just too big of a difference between the blue and the gold, and it just looked clunky. So now what I'm doing is just running a thin layer of the blue over the gold so that I get a little bit of the shimmer underneath. Okay, so I've got a handful of them done with this overlay, the gold, and yeah, I don't know if I'm liking that or not. But anyway, I've started to go ahead and do the tops and bottoms in just the plain blue, and we'll see what I think of that. I've only done a small selection of them, although these are all in gold already. So I don't know exactly what I think about that, but I did want to note that, so using the color box ink, I'm just running it along the ink pad here, and it wraps around a lot. Oh, I probably shouldn't have wiped it off first. So it wraps around quite a bit. However, with this particular cardstock, you can scrub it off. So if you just kind of give it a good rub, it is coming off. This is making this a very labor-intensive process. You know, if I'd have just done a single stamp color or a single marker color, that would have been fine. If you notice when I smear it, I probably won't show up on camera, but it makes just like a shadow kind of, which actually does match the mountains and the design of this particular deck, but just something that I noticed and wanted to point out because this is a new tool for me. So I haven't used this particular stamp before. You can't see the run over at all on the fronts most of the time, certainly on the bottoms because the bottoms are blue. But you can somewhat see them on the tops on occasion. But I'm definitely noticing that there's a lot of blue in this deck because it's not showing up in many places because it's just blending right in with the blue color. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So I just wanted to kind of point that out. I don't know what I'm thinking about this. I really see there's some bleed over the front, which kind of blends in, but if you catch it before it really dries, you can wipe it off. And I missed the top of that one. So I don't know what I'm feeling about this. I like the blue color. I don't think I like the gold blue thing that I've got going on the sides. But you know, it doesn't always turn out. It doesn't always turn out the way I hope it's going to, or the way that I plan. And that's okay. You know, sometimes it's hard to tell until you kind of get in there and see what you got going on with the cards and what things are actually gonna look like. Sometimes when I do the multicolor edging where I have kind of that gradient look, sometimes it works really well. It often depends on the colors that I'm working with. For the blue and the gold, it was too big of a difference, and it just made it look weird. And so now I'm going with this for the moment, just filling in those tops and bottoms, and I'll see after I get some of this section of them done what I think, but I'm thinking that I'm probably just going to end up going over the whole thing in blue, which is fine. It didn't take me that long to edge this in gold. I could have also just finished edging the whole thing in gold, and I think that would have looked just fine too, but I bought this blue specifically for this deck, so I wanted to really use it instead, because I really like this blue color. I'm also really curious to see if it holds its color, and if it's going to end up transferring off of my hands, which I hope not. I mean, it's all over my hands right now, but because blue tends to be a really hard color to work with. It doesn't soak into the cardstock a lot of the time, so it just kind of sits on top, and then you just continually get transfer off on your hands. And so that's been a problem that I've had with a lot of different blues and a lot of different types of markers, from art markers to Crayolas. And so I'm curious to see how this blue works. It is archival, so hopefully that means it'll stay, but you just never know. This is taking quite a bit longer because I am taking the time to kind of scrub it off the back. Although if I just left it, it would just create this almost like shadow look in the mountains. And that would probably be fine. And we'll see how long I feel like actually sitting here and scrubbing this blue off. And see how long I continue to actually do that. Or maybe I just end up leaving it on there like a little shadow. We shall see. So I'm going to finish this little part up and then we'll check back in. Okay, so I have finished trimming and edging the second edition of the Star Tarot, and I really like the blue color. So I used this color box, and it is the sailboat color. It is archival ink, so I'm hoping that it will hold up pretty well. I did several different layers. So the first layer that I did was just a gold on the two long sides of the deck. I was hoping to do kind of a faded look. It came out a little bit more kind of vintagey than I was really hoping for. Let's pull it in so you can see. But I do really like the top color. I think it's a great color for this deck. I'm not 100% convinced on what I've done on the sides. Love the top and bottoms. So I might at some point decide to go back over those sides again with another color or with another layer of the blue. This has 2 coats of blue on the top and bottom, and it has 2 coats of blue on the sides as well, but it has an underlayer of gold, and then rather than really saturating it, I just kind of lightly rubbed it on and then wiped off all the excess. So, I mean, I don't hate it. I don't love it, but I don't hate it. So that's cool. It's still like, even though I've taken all the gold gilding off, it's still really big and probably still a little bit wet. So shuffling it isn't like, it's not a whole lot better to shuffle, just because of the size of it. It shuffles fine in terms of actually shuffling. Maybe I could do it sideways. I don't think that's going to work any better because I've got a bow in it now. I do have to say that while edging this deck, I was having to actually rub pretty hard, like really kind of getting in there and really scrubbing at the deck to get the overflow off. And I don't know if it's because it's that matte cardstock or what, but I mean, it totally came off and that's great. But the reason I bring it up is because I kind of abused this deck a little bit in my scrubbing it down, and it's taken the abuse really well. There's one card that I bent, and it doesn't even show up obviously in here. Oh wait, maybe there it is. Yep, there it is, the Prince of Swords. So I was not really paying attention, and I was watching videos as I did this, and I totally bent this card. So this is totally on me. I totally did that, but beside that, the rest of like the deck really took the brunt of what I've put it through really well. So I think that's probably a pretty good testament to how well this cardstock is going to hold up, because it's really held up pretty well under the abuse I just put it through. I still can't really get my hands around it very easily, and riffle shuffling it is still a challenge for me. It's a very long deck. But again, I have my pocket size one, and I wanted to keep the titles on this. I think if you were to take the titles off, I think it'd be the perfect size. I think that really is like what the artwork size is like the perfect size for the deck. I didn't take the titles off because I have the first edition that I've already taken down to the artwork. So I wanted to keep this edition with the titles on it. However, that does mean that it's pretty long and it's a little hard for me to get my hands around, but I think that it looks really beautiful, and I like it now that it doesn't have the gilding on it. That at least, you know, definitely helps, because now we have just a color, and it feels so much nicer in my hand, other than it's not quite dry yet, so it's still feeling a little bit tacky, and I'm getting some blue on my hands. So I'm going to go ahead and call this one done. I'm going to set this deck aside and let it really dry before I actually dive into using it. Thank you for joining me for this mod with me. You will find links for the decks and products that I've used in this video in the description box below. I hope you enjoyed this process and will join me again soon for more creative tarot for an inspired life.